very much. For the record, I'm also not a doctor. I just want to make sure that we have that out there. I was really excited about the selection that the organizers made of these panelists, because I think it's going to give us an opportunity to really take a look at the question about the future of enterprise resource planning through the eyes of three very, very different perspectives. So with that said, as opposed to starting off with a bunch of assumptions about the terminologies that we're going to be discussing, I kind of wanted to give each of the panelists an opportunity to talk about how it is that they define enterprise resource planning, and what does it mean from their particular perspective. We've got academia, we've got established legacy business, and we've got a startup. Jake, I could ask you, as the founder of the startup in the space, to briefly define what enterprise resource planning means for you, and what is your perspective as how it's in your day-to-day operations?
Sure. So just to give everybody a little background on myself, before starting Libra, I was an IT consultant, worked for Capgemini. I was an SAP guy. Specialized in SAP payroll, did some BI stuff as well. So I do come from that ERP world. What ERP means to me simply is this is the major software that a company relies on to keep all of their internal business processes organized and digitized. ERP of the future means to me, I might make a jump from enterprise to ecosystem. That there might be a future where it's not necessarily about resource planning inside the enterprise. We've mostly solved for that. SAP and Oracle have over the last couple of decades solved for planning inside of an enterprise. As you think about blockchain networks, they're multi-party networks across suppliers, distributors, supply chains. There's an opportunity now to do resource planning on an ecosystem level across parties. So I'm not necessarily defining ERP, but the future of ERP. Mm-hmm. That's my take on it.
Do you have anything to add to in the current state what enterprise resource planning means to you?
Well, some of the work that we do, and you talk about ontologies, and I'm not sure whether the audience is familiar with the term and understands how it's applied, but basically an ontology is a way of representing a slice of reality. And if you look at various ontologies, in biology and so on, they deal with certain areas of reality. And it's a very important topic for instance, artificial intelligence, because in order to be able to communicate back and forth with a person, you have to have an understanding of what you're talking about, and that's the basis of natural language and ontologies. So the work that we do is on business ontologies, and we're almost done with a monograph that was commissioned by the American Accounting Association on business ontologies, and particularly the REA ontology that we worked on with my co-author there for a number of years. And the first couple parts of it deal with what we call the trading partner view of the world, that is internal to the firm. And I'm glad you sort of brought that up, but the future, we believe the future is sort of the collaboration space where different parties collaborate on business processes, and in order to do that, they need a shared view of the world. And so the Chapter 5 deals very specifically with the collaboration view of the world and how you represent business processes in a way that different parties can collaborate and understand what they're talking about. We've heard that a couple times today, with the person on the government accounting, that we're going to put this stuff out and everybody's going to sort of be able to use it. Well, that's not a trivial issue, and it requires a sort of this shared view of the world so they can actually understand what's going on.
Sure. Nate, could you walk us through from SAP's perspective in a daily operational status? How do you view enterprise resource planning?
We view it as an internal record of what's going on, what transactions have gone on. More or less, it's just a source of the truth from the perspective of it's a cost center. It's not a external business network like blockchain. Blockchain's it's more of an application which will be in the future. It will be integrated into ERP systems.
So I think obviously from the brief overview that we've had here, the common theme here in a lot of ways is that these are systems that operate inside the enterprise. The whole idea that these systems exist inside enterprises can potentially be paradoxical with the idea of a distributed ledger. I'd like to just ask, do you view enterprise resource planning as something that can be distributed within an enterprise, or does it require that what was formerly inside the enterprise begin to be exposed to a larger network?
I'll take the first shot at that. It's going to be kind of cheap and corny. I believed in a balanced view, and Libra stands for balance because it's a scale. But there's a balance between what type of data can and should be shared. Not everything, not all of an enterprise's data belongs in a shared environment. There is certain types of data and certain types of values. For instance, the mathematical proofs that create clearing and settlement, that's something that can be shared. So the notion of all business process and all types of data moving into a shared environment is an extreme, and the current extreme is that you don't want to share anything. And so there will be a balance that is struck where there's this a co-maintenance of data, values, fields that belong in a shared environment where others have a certain level of transparency to, and all sorts of data that remains private. Where that balance is struck, who knows? And it goes back and forth. We see some protocols taking perspectives that want to put as much data as possible onto the blockchain, or whether you put as much data as possible on the blockchain and then encrypt it, or is it unencrypted? And then there's, hey, we only need really 5 fields of data on a blockchain: your date, your cryptographic account, your cryptographic signature, it's a transaction hash, an amount, and an asset. And that's all you ever need, and everything else should just be associated, with a pointer. So we'll see. That's kind of one of the most interesting things about this space is there'll be new best practices on what type of data and processes belong on chain and what types don't.
To ask the question in a slightly different way, do you get the impression that companies are excited about the idea of having the opportunity to gain efficiency by breaking down some of the walls that were historically separating their internal operations from outside networks? Are they welcoming this opportunity, or is there a little bit of apprehension about the idea that the possibilities provided by a distributed ledger could somehow undermine the core services?
I think it's still evolving, personally. I think that customers and partners are all, essentially looking at what the future holds. They're asking a lot of questions, but it's something that is evolving, and how blockchain plays into the whole ERP system and what the next generation is. It's sort of also looking at how machine learning fits in, and how AI fits in, and how, big data, how is big data going to be put in? So it's one of a lot of things that the next generation ERP system will actually put in place, or how it will look. I mean, it's still evolving. Like we're hearing, this whole blockchain space is an evolution.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, when we start talking about what should be on the blockchain, what I talked about was collaboration, the collaboration space. And if you look at sort of what's going on now, there are companies that have similar processes but separated, but it's the same process.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a benefit to saying, let's have one general representation of that we can both agree on. And that's sort of that smart contract. Now, our REA contracts deal with the very specific notion of how you identify what goes in that contract. And actually, I wrote a paper, this was about, it turns out 12 years ago, that I said the future of auditing is going to be not what you have to what you should disclose, but what you don't have to disclose. And so the future of auditing, my personal perception is that it's going to change into, if we start going into this collaboration space, do I have to tell you that I'm going to use this sugar to make my Coca-Cola, and how much am I going to contract for that? Or do I not have to tell you that I have a conversion business process that's going to use that, and how much do I have to tell? And do I have to tell you when I'm going to go, and so on. And so this notion of what can go on the blockchain is also part of the question of the changing environment for what I don't have to tell you as opposed to what I have to tell you.
Could you, I like the idea of every enterprise having its own internal processes, many of which are the same. Could you talk a little bit about the potential efficiencies that could be gained in that system by building or by standardizing the way that these processes are conducted from enterprise to enterprise?
Well, that's what, it's that the REA Ontology talks about what kinds of things, how to talk about similar things in similar ways. And as soon as you start, I don't want to get into too much depth in AI and so on, but that was always the problem.
Everyone likes a little AI, so.
But not the I. But the problem always is how, how do you see the world, and is there a shared way of seeing the world? And when the monograph comes out, I'm sure you'll all buy it, and it will. But it does. The world of sharing information is also sharing perceptions of the world, and it turns out that unless you have that shared perception, you can't really share. There's always this disagreement, and all the contracting about, well, are you done? Well, what do you mean by done? What do you mean I've completed? What do I mean then I've assured it? Everybody has these different meanings, and some of them are, and we were talking about this earlier, that my view is transparency is much better than regulation. As soon as you get to regulation, there is all sorts of, I guess I'm a free markets person too, but I don't believe that regulation will always have someone who can figure out how to game a regulation.
I do want to talk about regulation, but I'd like to give each of the panelists an opportunity. Jake, could you go ahead and pick up from there? Can you talk a little bit about some concrete examples of the kinds of efficiencies that could be brought into an enterprise resource planning system by integrating it or rethinking it on a distributed ledger?
Yeah, sure. So you have different processes when it comes to finance, financial services, and you can go into supply chain, or then you can go into healthcare. But let me just pick a supply chain example. As goods travel from one step to another, and they trade hands many times, there's often the opportunity to introduce fraud or waste or counterfeit goods into that process. And if you have, on the very beginning, on the initial side of a supply chain, a positive, I guess it's a hash or an identifier, if you will, for those goods entering the blockchain, they can be checked every step of the way against the original values. And then, they don't necessarily have to use, the same software, the same ERP system, but as long as they're connected to the same network, they can always go back and refer to the original values, and if there's any differences, they know where that there's somewhere along the chain of the supply chain that they can identify something that went wrong, or some sort of fraud that occurred, or some sort of introduction of counterfeit goods. So that's just a very generic example where I think supply chains, especially cross-border supply chains, very complex ones, might be some of the most obvious ways that blockchains can create efficiencies
Nick, do you have
and prevent fraud and waste as well.
Nick, do you have any examples to help us kind of wrap our heads around some concrete efficiencies that could be brought into enterprise resource planning systems?
So earlier in my career, I worked for a consumer products company, and we did letters of credit, so I could see it having relevance in commercial letters of credit where you buy peanuts. And that letter of credit process was very arduous, and you needed the bill of lading, you needed the invoices, you needed to put all that together in a manual process. So if I could see that from a supply chain perspective, not a supply chain, more of a blockchain perspective, having electronic settlement of that, because you have the bank and then you have, the buyer and the seller, and you would use blockchain rather than someone putting together all that documentation, sending it to the bank, who has to get approval by, the seller, and then bring it back. So that process usually took like 2 weeks. I mean, you could see that shortening up that process by 2 weeks to maybe a couple of days, maybe a day. I don't know if you see that, but that's external to the ERP system. That's a treasury process. So someone in the treasury department had to do that.
So do you see enterprise resource planning systems staying essentially the same going forward, and having blockchain use cases integrated at the fringes?
Yeah, on the edge, more on the edge than the applications and how they actually have to interface with the ERP system. It's like I said, it's evolving, and I don't really know. You just have to sort of see what develops. So you have companies starting up, doing different things, and you just have to essentially innovate, co-innovate with partners.
Can you explain a little bit why you see the ERP itself as almost maybe sacrosanct and not to be touched by blockchain, whereas the real innovation will happen in the way that it is integrated with other use cases? Is it too difficult? Is it not necessary? Why won't the enterprise resource planning systems in their own right be distributed internally?
Internally they could be distributed from a blockchain perspective, but that's internal to the ERP system. I think what you want to see is also some evolution externally, right? Blockchain's an external, transactional system, right? So you want to see how that sort of plays out. Now, that's not to say 10 years from now, everything will change. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Never mind, 10 years from now.
Jake, what do you think about that?
This has actually always been a good question in my mind, is given that blockchains are happening over here, is the reaction of traditional IT infrastructure, ERPs of the world, SAP and Oracle, is it that, all right, these things are happening, they're cool, and we'll need to build compatibility for them? Is that simply the way that the industry evolves, and in that way blockchains use, if you've ever read The Innovator's Solution, Jeremy told me to read that, is, in that regard, if that's the way the future is, that's a bit of a sustaining technology and presents a new opportunity for ERP providers to build, hey, there's a new module and it allows you to integrate with blockchains, and maybe the future looks like that. Maybe the future looks like blockchains are happening, and what they actually represent is entirely new ways to re-engineer a business process. ERPs have standardized what business process looks like, but if what's going on with blockchains is so radically different that you get to totally re-engineer a business process, then maybe it's not just a matter of plugging that business process into an ERP just so that your ERP can tell what's going on the blockchain. Maybe it's that blockchain process replaces one of the traditional business processes. In the end, there's going to be some blend of both. And right now, all I see just from the reaction of incumbent software companies is that blockchains are happening over here. We got to make sure we can build compatibility for them, because they're happening. They're definitely coming.
Graham, do you agree with that? That it's essentially making existing systems blockchain compatible, or is it about actually reimagining the ERP itself?
Well, I think our view is this notion that the future is this dealing with interactions between companies, and so if there are processes that are shared, and I'll give you another sort of this application or use case. And in the Moderator, we talk about, and this is a fairly complex set of what we call about state machine mechanics. Okay, and in order to have those sort of this collaboration space deal with that state machine view of the world, they have to have this shared ontology about what the states are that we are looking for, and what business events will cause different states to exist, to terminate, to When is the deal abandoned? How do we know that we actually finished? And all those kinds of things are that shared view of the world. And as soon as we start saying we're going to try and make these two different vendors talk to each other, it just doesn't work. We have to have this shared view of the world. And then we start saying, because we share that view, then we can start working on the process that can be shared, parts that we want to hide. And if you read a lot of classical or economics on a firm, we basically talk about two types of things that are going on: exchanges and conversions. And conversions are internal processes. And if I don't have to reveal my conversion, then what I should be thinking about are all the exchanges that I'm going to do. And all the business events, the states that cause those exchanges to either complete or terminate. Because there's a lot more to contracts than the goods were delivered. It is, as you get more complex contracts, you buy the raw materials. Now I owe part of it. So how do I know that the raw materials actually got there? I didn't deliver them to you. So there's this business event that says, so I got to share that that's what it meant to get them there, for instance. That's not an ERP. I have to know that. I have to be able to share that.
So you've all three provided some really nice concrete examples of the kinds of efficiency. As somebody who writes the word efficiency 11,000 times every week,
It's not a very efficient process.
It's not. It's not. And I also have become increasingly aware that efficiency is kind of a euphemism for removing jobs. Are there any particularly susceptible jobs where if I have this title, I might want to start taking a defensive look at what the future of my position holds?
Cab driver.
in the ERP system space. If you had a child or a grandchild that was considering going into applying for a job that was related in some way to enterprise resource planning, is there a job that you would tell them not to apply for because it's not going to be around in a couple of years?
Yeah, invoice filler outer by pen.
Invoice filler outer by pen. Any other positions that are particularly susceptible?
I don't know if it's susceptible, but I would never ever let anyone that I know get into payroll.
Which part of it? The getting paid part or the doing?
Configuring the system.
I think it's more that the repetitive type of job will probably go away, but I think I see that as more people, more employees, more finance folks, more value added to the business, trying to build the business up. So rather than just reconcile over like having 200 people in the reconciliation area, those people will be ingrained with the business or embedded with the business to actually do more analytical work on how to grow the business.
So one of the things I love about the industry, and I find so fascinating writing about what you all do, is because it does seem there's almost like a genetic mutation within the companies that start to experiment with blockchain as they kind of reimagine the way that they fit into the ecosystem around them. The first application, of course, is the Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain, which kind of reimagined payments without borders, removing borders between transactions. I find it fascinating to hear you all talk about how the borders between what were previously considered internal operations and external operations are starting to change, that people are starting to reimagine, well, what can I share? What is truly fundamental to the value that I bring? As this reevaluation is occurring, and as new efficiencies are being sought by reimagining what is inside the company and what is outside the company, are there any regulatory concerns that need to be considered? Are there protections for your clients or for your clients' customers that need to be thought of as the potential impact of blockchain is considered in your organizations?
Kind of a radical thought is that when regulators regulators tend to want an increase in availability of information. Blockchain and sharing economy sort of situation can be attractive to the regulator because they may see an opportunity to gain more insights and have a more real-time view of what it is that they regulate. And I think maybe today, and especially in the past couple of years, blockchain for its, in terms of its pseudo-anonymous qualities has been very scary to the regulator. I think that it's starting to almost go completely 180, and as the transparency qualities of blockchains start to emerge, I can see a day where there are certain processes that the regulator requires to be on a blockchain-based system because of its qualities for transparency, required sort of sharing, which exists to a certain extent. You have to share, your financial statements on a quarterly basis, for instance. But what else a decade from now will the regulator require to be published on a real-time blockchain? Who knows? So I don't know. I can't speak to any regulatory concerns per se, but I do think the regulator is going to be very keen on the technology, and actually, there's a day where they're going to perhaps require blockchains. It could happen.
And then, Nick, are there regulatory considerations that you would like to emphasize, or would you like to add to this idea that perhaps regulators will begin to demand real-time access to information that they now only get quarterly or annually?
Well, I think that if Bitcoin's a bubble and it goes down, then you'll see a lot of regulation come out of the woodwork, because I think that from that perspective, anytime there's the market tanks, you'll see something. But right now, I think like everybody, the regulators are also evaluating. What does blockchain mean? What does Bitcoin mean? What is cryptocurrency? What does that actually mean for companies? And there's only a small amount of companies that are actually using it, and it hasn't really exploded yet. There's a reason why pension plans aren't getting into it. And really, when you think about it, not even, because then you sort of get into the argument: is it a security or is it currency?
I do want to talk a little bit about cryptocurrencies. Before we do that, Glenn, from a regulatory perspective, is this a heavily regulated industry? Is there a reason for people who are experimenting with the technology to be cautious as they experiment? Or
Well, if you heard me this morning, I'm very much against regulation. Okay, because one of the things that I think people need to start thinking about now is what I don't have to tell you. And right now, it's the other way around. I have to tell you what my P&L, I have to tell you my net income, I have to tell you this. Well, and again, I wrote this 12 years ago, that the future is going to be, and should be, people getting involved and saying, no, you can't know what I did yesterday. I'm sorry. You don't have to tell what my salary is. You don't have to, because it's there right now. It's out there, and so it's the more we put on the blockchain. I was here yesterday. How do I know that? Well, because you signed this contract or whatever. I shouldn't have to, and I don't want regulators knowing, and then because it's much harder to say, okay, you found out too much, we're going to back off. If you start giving regulators more information, they're not going to say, we don't really need this. Don't send it to us anymore. They're going to say, I like this too, and so I believe we should stop.
Awesome. So with that, I'd like to kind of open it up to some questions. The gentleman here.
So I do represent a regulator. I'm
not talking. No.
That's fair. I'm very low level employee. So what my
that's what they all say.
What is so blockchain is very impressive. I've been learning more and more about it. It's very interesting, but regulators are not necessarily in the business of encouraging or propping up a particular technology over something else. What is a specific market failure that you're trying to solve? That's when a regulator should come in when markets are not working efficiently then you come in and do something.
See, I would
What is that?
disagree with that. I would say when you have a market failure, it may be that the transparency isn't there. And that may be more of the problem, you know. So, you know, someone wants to, you know, I was talking to someone earlier, I was down in Washington, D.C., this was before and there were houses that were 2-bedroom starter homes, $820,000. Now, why should I protect someone from buying that? Why should a regulator step in and say, you know, we're going to get your money back because you made a stupid choice of, you know, in that bubble? You know, and I talk about a book that, you know, in every country that I can see that where regulators have gone in, there's corruption, you know, because I got to pay someone or whatever, you know, and then I'm going to do something else to get around that regulation. You're going to have to prove to me that the regulation is far better than letting people know what's going
Then
on.
what does it mean to have transparency if no one's looking? Or is not? I feel like the regulators would still be the ones who would have to look. Or would you see like a self-policing system where once everything is more transparent, then the competitors are watching each other?
No, I'll leave that to you.
You know, and I'm I'm a professor of accounting, right? So I believe in disclosure, okay, and you know, but it's funny because in the 1934 Securities and Exchange Act, companies didn't even want to disclose net income. I thought that was too much. Okay, so but you know, there has to be this shared process, the shared, you know, and we're going to tell you, but I don't want the regulators saying, how about telling us a little bit more? You know, I'm going to go to my congressman, and then they're going to say, you know, they really need to know, you know, what the president ate for lunch or whatever. You know, I mean, it just
He'll
after a
tell
while.
you. You want to know or not, he'll tell you.
Yeah. Well, we have cameras, so you don't have to tell us. Right?
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah. So, technically, how challenging it would be to integrate the blockchain technology into the existing ERP system?
Good question. I'd love to answer that because that's one of the issues that Libra is solving for. So blockchains are new data structures. They're not like traditional relational databases. And in order, just step one, before these new data structures can be readable or digestible by traditional IT infrastructure, whether it be SAP, Oracle, or a BI system, you've got to be able to translate those new data structures into a canonical data model. Either it's a traditional relational database or some kind of database that is digestible. Before that, you're going to get that record and that information into the ERP. So there's a step. It's actually kind of boils down to there needs to be a middleware solution between the blockchain and ERP and traditional infrastructure. That's one of the things that Libra builds is middleware between blockchain and ERP.
Any other technical thoughts to that question?
No, I think that.
Well, and that's what we're talking about, the collaborative, that ontology, is that structure for that interface.
Awesome. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. I would think that organizations like SAP would be looking at ways to utilize blockchain to communicate between users of SAP or Oracle, whatever the ERP system is, as a way to kind of get into that market. Is that anywhere in the conversation?
When you say between users, between like if you have.
Between users of the same platform, like the same ERP system. So various organizations that utilize SAP, for example, would be the first opportunities to utilize blockchain technology to exchange information about transaction exchanges. Is that
So
anywhere in the
that's it.
conversation?
I think that's a terrific point. I'm not aware of that, but so using blockchain like I have an SAP users blockchain.
Right, as
Yeah.
a way to get into the market, and then
Right.
go out from there, just as you would like an EDI system between, organizations that maybe use the same EDI. I don't know.
Any other thoughts here?
Just at a high level, I do think, whether it's blockchain based or not, there's going to be an EDI 2.0 that happens in the future, perhaps. But the other thing is there's traditional software companies can take one of two routes, which is, and I kind of was alluding to this earlier, but the easy way to think is, what can I do to build readiness and compatibility for blockchains, which is totally different than what am I going to do with blockchain technology. I think that's where the exciting stuff comes, and your question kind of is in that latter category, is rather than just getting readiness for new tech, it's what are we going to do different with it.
So nothing from SAP, I'm just curious, like that's not a part of that conversation.
David's part of our strategy.
I'm a colleague of
Yeah.
Nick's also SAP, in strategy. So I think, so the short answer is yes, absolutely. And a lot of people are saying the same thing using different words, right? So especially in verticals or industries where SAP has a strong footprint across the value chain, right? Supply chain, then, and it's not about us even having to push for it, right? It's just customers, right? Right now, it's still about education. It's customer, whether it's the retailer or the OEM or the supplier, asking us first for education, right? What is SAP point of view on blockchain? What do you think it means for us as for instance, a food product company? And then what do you have for us to go innovate with blockchain, right? So short answer is yes.
Yes, sir.
Sure. So I think there's been a real good distinction between using the blockchain in terms of external communications and then internal processing and so on. I think over the past few years we've seen a lot of improvements to ERP systems with systems like HANA and in-memory computing, things like virtualization. I guess the question that I have is what are the big benefits of using the blockchain internally? We know what it is externally, but can we speak to some of the things that we've seen as positives of doing it in an internal system where we've really worked out a lot of the kinks and we have systems like in-memory computing that support us?
I don't think as much about internal use of blockchain as I do about cross-enterprise use of blockchains. There are some enterprises that are so big and so global that their internal units might as well be different companies. And I think for the largest of corporations, there are cross-business unit that there's opportunities for blockchain in the largest of companies. And I guess you could say that's internal. But I don't have any specific example for you as an internal blockchain.
Just a question. The indexing and so on blockchains is not very great. I have to do a really serial search still, right, on blockchains? Is that right? So it can't be more efficient than a database that's optimized and indexed, right? It just can't.
That's true.
Okay.
How are we doing on time here?
Yeah, I can give an example of internal use across subsidiaries, right? Is the KYC in banking.
Yeah,
So if the subsidiaries don't, it's very sensitive information, you find are at stake. And so if those subsidiaries do not trust each other, sorry.
Well, please continue now. We'll wrap up here.
Yeah, if those subsidiaries do not trust each other, right, the use of a blockchain and not having to rely on any one central in the corporation, makes a big difference.
So I do want to wrap it up. One word answers in the context of ERP, public blockchain, and private blockchain.
Private.
Yes. Private.
All right, thank you all.